I want to start with a little journey to Kunming, China. Now, you've probably never heard of Kunming, China. I hadn't until recently. But if you happen to live in the southwest of China, you probably know it very well, because it's the largest city in the southwest of China. It is a major trade route through to India, and it has been for 1,000 years. So it's a very popular place, and it's a big city. It's about the size of Chicago. It has all of the modern accoutrements that cities have. It also has really beautiful this whole rock formation thing that they've turned into sort of a monastery. These rocks are 10 stories high, and so it's a great place to visit. But one of the main reasons people visit is to go and see the Apple stores. And these are not any Apple stores. These are fake Apple stores. They're not real. Apple does not have a store in Kunming, China. They have a store in Beijing. They have a store in Shanghai. But those are the only two stores they have in China. They do not have one in Kunming. They have no plans to open one in Kunming, as far as I know. But there are 34 fake Apple stores in China, and in Kunming, China, in this one city. 34 fake stores. And by fake, I mean identical in practically every way. They have the same furniture, they have the same painting, they have the same tables. Even the clerks wear the same T-shirts and have the same badges. Right? They have completely mimicked everything to the smallest detail. Well, almost. Occasionally they get a detail wrong. But this is really amazing, right? This is more than just idolizing. There's something to this. And the thing is that they don't do this for other stores. There are no 34 or even one mimicked Radio Shacks, right? There are no mimics of Dunkin' Donuts. They have chosen Apple stores, and they just idolize these things. And it's really quite stunning that they have done just that. And the thing is that this isn't just happening in Kunming, China. Others are mimicking the Apple store all over the world. For example, you can go into practically any major mall now in the US and you will find a mimic store that happens to be run by Microsoft, that has the same furniture, the same white decorations on the wall, the same posters, and they even get down to the same T-shirts with the same badges. And this is Microsoft doing this. And Barnes & Noble, when they started selling their e-reader, the Nook, set up in their stores a similar configuration to these things with the same types of attributes that we see in the Apple stores. And they are mimicking this. And even J.C. Penney has gone so far, they went so far as to hire the vice president at Apple who built the original Apple stores to go be CEO, thinking that that would do the trick, and subsequently fired him when it didn't. But they went and converted their stores to look like an Apple store. Now, this is interesting because what is it about the Apple store that makes this work? Well, design. The Apple stores are very, very designed. That's one of the things that's there. And what does that mean, to be very designed? Well, design is about rendering intent. So what they are doing is they are intentionally trying to create a great experience. And that great experience is really interesting because it's an evolution of retail. Retail started with carts. People coming around with carts and baskets and selling you goods in your own place. Stores are a relatively new phenomena, having shown up only a few hundred years ago. The little corner store, which was a centralized place where you could offer more goods because you didn't have to carry them around. And then department stores happened only in the last 100 years, with the intent that you could have multiple lines of product in one space. Malls came after that, as did big box stores. And then this highly designed shopping experience, this is the new thing. That's what these stores are all about, are these highly tailored, highly designed shopping experiences. And the reason everybody's excited about this is because of numbers. In particular, the numbers that show that Apple sells 2.5 times more per square foot than the next highest retailer, which is Tiffany's. They sell 17 times more than square foot than the average mall store. And the year-over-year growth on this is stunning. So boardrooms of retailers everywhere are asking, why are we not selling as well as Apple? And people say, well, we're not doing the same thing. We're not designing the same solution. So we need to design the same solution to make that work. We need to set the intent. And that's what is happening here. We're thinking about design at all levels of the organization now. And that shows itself in a lot of different ways. Most of you have probably heard of the organization Kickstarter. Kickstarter lets people fund projects. They don't actually have to build them or deliver on them. They can just collect the money and do whatever they want with it. But most do actually end up building or delivering on what they want. Headlines were made when a Kickstarter project, Kickstarter had been around for a couple of years, but a Kickstarter project called the Pebble, which was for a watch. A watch. Okay, it's a special watch. It talks to Bluetooth to your phone, and it can run apps, and it can do all sorts of cool stuff. People fell in love with the design of this watch and started to bid on it. In fact, 68,000 people, more than 68,000 people, bid on this thing, raising $10 million through Kickstarter. Interestingly enough, they just showed up at CES last week with working prototypes of the watch, and they're claiming they're going to be shipping them in the next few weeks to the 69,000 people who ordered one in advance. And everybody did this not because of anything other than the design of the watch. It was the design that did this, by a handful of designers who had an idea and no way to make that idea real except to beg. Kickstarter has another name. It's called bake sale. It's basically, if anyone who's ever run a Kickstarter project knows that if you do a 30-day Kickstarter project, it's a 30-day bake sale where you just harass all of your family and friends until they give in to give you money, and to tell all their family and friends to give you money. And that's what happens. Now, Kickstarter isn't the only place this is happening. It's happening in corporate America. But we're seeing this design coming up with something new, revolutionizing an industry, like changing the retail store. Here, we're changing the watch business. And it's not being done by one of the big watch manufacturers. This isn't being done by Timex. This isn't being done by Swatch. This is being done by a bunch of guys with a video camera who made a video to sell a watch. And suddenly, things are changing. Honeywell has been in the thermostat business for years. They didn't come up with the new thinking in thermostats. Instead, the Nest, which is a Wi-Fi enabled thermostat that has motion sensors in it that watches the behavior in your house, and if it notices you're not home, turns your temperature down. This came out of a bunch of guys with a video camera. who made this. Turns out one of the dudes was the designer of the iPod, so he had some experience packing lots of little components into small round things. But he did this, and now it's revolutionizing the thermostat business because it is better designed. It's so well designed that even a dog can use it. Zipcar has changed the auto industry. So much so that Avis just purchased them for $500 million. And they did it through design. They did what was considered to be impossible to do, which was to rent cars for less than a day at a reasonable cost. In fact, just hours, and to do it without any personnel watching over the inventory. Zip cars are parked in city spaces, and if you want to reserve one, you do it online, and then you take your little RFC card to the NFC card to this thing, and wave it over the sensor, and if it's your turn, it opens the car and lets you drive it. And it's amazing. And it's a very designed experience. There's a lot of intention behind everything they do. And interestingly enough, it is changing the auto industry. So much more so that Hertz has launched their own competitor, and Avis just decided to buy them outright instead of trying to build their own competitor. They actually made an attempt at it. It failed, so they just bought it outright. So it's changing the industry. And it's not just in high tech that we see this. It's in practically every industry. A little street performer in Montreal starts to put together a show that is remarkably different than any other show that's out there and ends up with Cirque du Soleil, which is now a franchise that brings in more in ticket sales every night than all of Broadway. So the money is there. Design pays off. There's a return on investment. All these years, we've been trying to make the argument for what's the ROI of design, and it's been there in front of us all along. It's just do great stuff. And so that's what we're seeing. And so now it's no longer about an ROI argument. It's about being mission critical. Every industry now sees experience design as the key core component of their success. And they know that the industry regulars who have been running those industries for a long time are completely threatened by the fact that someone can put up a Kickstarter project and completely unnerve everything that's going on. So they want to be there first. And so they're hiring. You don't have to go much farther than the birthplace of Silicon Valley to actually see this in action. It's really quite insane right now. A company like Facebook decides to buy an app, a simple little app. Not because it's the only camera app out there. In fact, Facebook, a month before they bought this thing, launched their own photo app. But it wasn't as good an experience as Instagram. So instead of trying to invest in their own team, they decided to buy the 6 people of Instagram for $1 billion. Which wasn't divided equally by 6, I'll add. And it was in stock, so it's no longer $1 billion. But it was a good amount of money in stock of Facebook. But that's a whole different problem. Silicon Valley, for a year or so now, has been starving for designers. Go to a meeting like this at Silicon Valley, and the announcements for who's hiring goes on for 45 minutes. They cannot get enough designers there. They are so desperate for designers that companies are paying $20,000 bounties. If you refer someone and they end up hiring them, they will give you $20,000 just for being that person's friend. So it's crazy what's going on. And it's not just the hiring that's happening. It's every aspect of the business. If we take a step back to 2006, this was the state of the art in telephones. And 2007, this appeared. And that change between these two things, that changed a lot of stuff. Now, the phones that were there in 2006, they actually now have a name. They're called feature phones because the way they were sold was all about what features they had on them. If you looked at any ad, if you watched any commercial, it was all about the features. But when the iPhone came out, suddenly it was all about the experience. And it wasn't that Apple had the first smartphone. There were a whole bunch of smartphones that existed before Apple had them. But Apple looked at that, and the design team there, the designers there, said, these suck. How would we make a phone that doesn't suck? And they sat down, and based on their own experience, without doing any research, because they didn't need to do research, because they all used these sucky phones every day, and they all lived with people who used these sucky phones every day, they went off and they built the iPhone. And the iPhone was revolutionary only in that it didn't suck. It had a great experience. So suddenly the conversation shifted from features to experience. And that shift is really important because it happens over and over and over again. People build up features, and then suddenly a company comes in with a better experience and takes over that market. It's interesting because Apple recently was involved in this little lawsuit with Samsung. You may have heard of it. And one of the pieces of evidence that they put up was this chart that showed the phones that Samsung was making before the iPhone and the phones that Samsung decided to make after the iPhone. And interestingly enough, it's that Chinese Apple Store, Kunming Apple Store phenomena all over again, where they just duplicated down to the smallest detail what was going on. Now, they didn't quite get it right in a lot of ways. So much so that Samsung's QA team produced a 132-page document about how they didn't get it right, with each page of the document talking about how the Apple iPhone works and how the Galaxy S1 works and how they need to change the functionality on the S1 to look more like the iPhone because it was better. It was a better experience. And so they were focusing on moving past features into experience. And this happens everywhere. And we see these revolutionary changes coming in. And sometimes they're visually very beautiful, but sometimes all they need to be is functionally better than what was there before. Craigslist is not a beautiful design, but it is a much better design than its predecessor, the newspaper classified. So, design, that act of rendering intent, that turns out to be really important. Now, of course, Craigslist is quite threatened because people who have a better eye for design can come in and take the ugly Craigslist page and turn it into something that looks better. This is what Airbnb is doing. And Airbnb is completely revolutionizing that part of the classifieds market. In fact, practically every aspect of the Craigslist offering has some Airbnb type equivalent that is changing the design and making everything even better. And the money is following all that. Everyone's betting on those better designed solutions. So what's driving this need for designers is really this shift from focusing on features to experience. And we see this in a lot of ways. Anyone who had to return something after the holidays to a store like Best Buy experienced long lines just standing there waiting. And that's because Best Buy and Walmart and all those retailers, they haven't designed the experience. They're still thinking about the individual activities. There's an activity of buying, there's an activity of returning. The activity of returning involves talking to a service rep. If a lot of people show up to return something at the same time, well, you'll just have to wait in line to get to the service rep. It's the way it's been done 100 years. So everybody does it. And nobody thinks twice about it. And so you get these long lines of folks just standing, waiting. Nobody likes this standing in line thing, but it's the way it is. And people actually refuse to make purchases from the vendors under the fear that they will have to, weeks later, stand in line to return things. So it affects their business. But could you design this better? What could you do with this?
Apple Store.
Gee, the Apple Store takes appointments. They've completely rethought that aspect of the line. There is no line there. You make an appointment. When the appointment comes up, you're there. They have little monitors that tell you what's there. So what do you do instead of standing in line? You shop. Exactly. So now they've changed that aspect of it. Standing in line was a design choice. It's what we call unintentional design. Nobody at Best Buy says, well, it's good for them to stand in line. It builds character. We only want customers who are willing to stand in line. But nonetheless, the layout of the store, the choices they made were that way. Someone else came along and said, it doesn't have to be this way. We can design with a different intent. We can actually make it better for the customer. And we can come up with something that's a better design. So there's lots of different ways that this happens. Bakeries and delis handed out numbers. The newer delis in supermarkets now let you place your order and shop in the rest of the store and call you when the order is done. Right? So this is not a special thing. And one of the things that people often accuse me of is talking too much about Apple. Apple makes their mistakes. They've put mistakes on the map. Or in the maps. So they are not. There are lots of examples of things that where Apple's gotten the experience wrong, and we can talk about that, right? What's interesting about the Apple Maps experience is that it's a content problem. They forgot that the content. Turns out the functionality of Apple Maps is wicked cool. You probably don't know this, but the iOS 6 version of Apple Maps is the first fully accessible to the blind map program. The only one as far as I know. And it gives beautiful sound cues when you walk off the path. It tells you the numbers of addresses as you walk past them. It does exactly what you would want something for the blind to do. It's life-changing for many folks. But the data has a small problem. And in the push to get a product out with better functionality, they made some business choices that caused them to move away from Google's data and to form their own, and they thought they could solve it by buying a couple of companies that had a good reputation without realizing the difference between what Google's maps were and whatever. And here's the thing. In San Francisco and Silicon Valley, Apple Maps works just fine. In Ireland, there's a small town called Airfield, Ireland, that does not have an airport. But on Apple Maps, it has a symbol for an airfield. And the Irish government got upset about this because they were afraid that somebody with a small plane and an iPad was going to try and land in Airfield, Ireland. And so they made them fix that. But there's all sorts of ways to do this. This is an application that Intuit makes to help you do your taxes. Oh my God, it sucks the characters right off the page. What it actually does is you take a picture of your W-2 that you get from your employer, and it automatically creates the tax form for you. If you're filing a 1040EZ, and all you have to do is take a picture of each of your W-2s, and then press a button to say submit, and you're done. Okay? So this, again, is a great experience. They've taken something equivalent to the lines at the store and made it into a great experience with a little bit of pomp and circumstance and Spielberg-style special effects. The fact is that these things, the store line, the filling out the tax form, those were gaps in the experience that people can now fill with intentional design. And so that's pretty much why, right now, it's a great time to be a designer. But this puts some pressure on us. You may have heard of this talk of this thing called Lean UX. Lean UX is a reinvention of the way we design in some ways. What it does is it says that design is no longer this process where we spend a lot of upfront time thinking about our solution and documenting it. Instead, it asks a couple of questions, like what can we do to get closer to a better user experience? And is this something that our customer will actually pay for? And can we just get something out there and learn from it? And this is a fundamental, for those of you who don't work in the UX field, this is a fundamental change from how UX has been done for the past 15 years, where we would rigorously think through a design before creating the first usable deliverables of these things that people could work with. And part of that was a tool problem. We didn't have the tools necessary to render our ideas quickly. And part of it was a cultural problem. The teams we were working with had these long upfront times where they were defining their architecture and defining their databases and defining their interfaces. And so we had to do something with that time so we would define our design. And the thinking was that that would all come together at once. But it doesn't work. It doesn't work on the architecture side, it doesn't work on the database side, and sure enough, it doesn't work on the UX side. It produces mediocre results. So while the rest of the world was moving to an agile development method, this idea of lean UX started to come about. And frankly, what's interesting about it is that there were those of us who've been talking about this for 20 years. I remember giving workshops talking about how to create quick paper prototypes. In fact, the first time I ever spoke at a Boston ACM event was a full-day workshop on paper prototyping in 1991. And at that time, what we were saying was, well, just build something quick and grab some users and put them in front of it and ask them to see what's going on and see if they would pay for it and see if with each iteration of the design it got you closer to something better, something easier to use. And so we were always looking for this sort of incremental method, this stepwise improvement to get us there. And so all lean UX is basically a repackaged, rethought through version at a time that's now possible to pull this off. It borrows its name from the lean startup movement, which a lot of organizations are looking at as a way to get their development done fast, which borrows its name from lean manufacturing, which is actually a 20-year-old process that Toyota invented to overcome the same problems in the car industry. So there's nothing new here except that people are thinking about it. And they're thinking about it because in order to produce those results that have those high returns, they have to do something different because the same actions were going to generate the same old results that were not sufficient. In order to move past the old definition of insanity, we have to do something new. And that something new means new process. So here we have been asking for these things all these years, and now we have it. And the Chinese? Well, they have a proverb for this. We have to be careful what we ask for because we might actually get it. The problem is that now senior management says, hey, experience design, that's our future. That's where we have to be. Okay, designers, your turn. And that's where the big problem starts. Because we've been whining about this, how we don't have a seat at the table, how we haven't had a chance to actually make this work for more than 20 years, and suddenly they're handing us the keys to the city and say, okay, you said you could do it, let's do it. So what does that actually mean to do experience design? Well, it turns out experience design has a lot of moving parts. First, we have to take whatever we're designing and make sure that all the information that's in it and all the functionality that's in it is stored in a way that people can find it. We call that information architecture. Next, we have to make sure all the words that appear on the screen actually communicate the messages we want them to communicate in an effective, meaningful way. There's a name for that. It's called copywriting. If we're going to do these incremental improvements, we have to have a process that lets us do that, which means we have to understand how we're going to actually iterate and learn from each iteration, and then integrate that back into the design and do that again. That's design process management, which is very related to the mechanism that actually tells us how each of those iterations work, which is user research, which lets us up front figure out who the users are, what we're trying to do, and then while we're designing, actually integrate that process together. And from there, we start to piece together the flows and the movement and the transitions, and that becomes the interaction design with the input and the output of the system that says, okay, this is everything that's going on. Now, a lot of the systems we build have large amounts of information, so we have to figure out how to visually represent that information in a way that people can understand what's going on and see glean the insights from the important things while not being bogged down with all the noise from the unimportant things, and that's information design. And that shouldn't be confused with visual design, which a lot of people think is all about aesthetic, but it's not about aesthetic. It is, in fact, all about prioritization of communication. It's about making sure that the most important stuff jumps off the screen when the user needs it, and the less important stuff whispers its message at that moment that the user needs to know about it. And then finally, we have to understand that the process of design is as much about saying no as it is about saying yes. That what makes great design are all the things we leave out of the design. In the feature world, we included everything. But in the experience world, we say no to a lot of things. And that's what the role of editing and curation is all about. So these are the skills that a team needs in order to be able to produce great designs. But over the last 8 or so years, we've been researching what it takes to do these great designs, and what we've learned is it doesn't stop here. That the most successful teams have more than just this. For example, they know how to go out into the field and actually meet with their customers and users and glean important insights about their context and what's going on. They understand a tremendous amount about the domain that they work in. If they're in medicine, if they produce products in healthcare, they understand healthcare. If they produce products in finance, they understand finance. So they have to have all these skills in those particular domains. At the same time, they have to understand how the business that they're in makes money to be able to support the products and services that they're producing. And they also need to deal with the fact that all these tools now produce a ton of information. All of this data is coming in from their customers all the time, and they have to move them, take that data and glean useful insights from it. So they have all these analytics to deal with. And at the same time, they have to be able to communicate to the users and the customers the value of the things that they're building and implementing. So they have to understand how to market what they're doing. Of course, the technology underneath is constantly changing, and so they have to keep up on what is possible and what is not possible based on what the implementation platforms are. And all of this means that they have to be able to turn to the stakeholders and say, look, this is going to cost you some money, but here's what you're going to get from it. So they have to understand how to talk about the ROI of all of this. On top of which, there's this huge fact that over the last 20 years, we've seen a dramatic shift where we're no longer designing an interface for a person talking to a computer. Almost every interface now is about people talking to other people, with the computers just as moderators. So everything is now social. So everything we have to deal with is about social. And at the same time, we have to figure out how to take all this and translate it into a language that the people who are going to implement it actually know. So we have to know what we can give them to make sure they implement the intent that we're building into our design, which means we have to know something about the methods they use to develop their process so we can fit within their schedule, within their budgets, and understand what they need when. And so now this is what you need in order to put together a great design. Thank you. Unfortunately, it doesn't even stop here. We have spent the last several years and most of this past year talking to hiring managers, asking them the question, if you think about the best designers you've ever had, what separates them from all the other designers? And what's come back are not any of these skills. What's come back are things like they know how to take what we're building and create a story that gets everybody involved in the process. They can explain that story to users. They can explain that story to other coworkers. They can explain that story to managers. And so they know how to tell a great story. What we heard from the hiring managers was these people know how to take criticism. They know how to give criticism. They know how to bring people in the room into a constructive and affirmative criticism process that actually moves the design forward. What we heard from the hiring managers is that they can take an idea in their head and very quickly, whether on a napkin or on a whiteboard or on a sheet of paper or on a computer screen, get that idea out so that people can give them feedback and criticism on it immediately at the level of detail that they have given it thought and not worry about things being rendered differently. So sketching an idea has been absolutely critical. And what the hiring managers told us was that being able to stand in front of your peers, stand in front of your stakeholders, stand in front of your users, and actually communicate your ideas in a cogent, interesting way, being able to present, is one of the top skills they need right now. And what the hiring managers tell us is that they need to be able to take a room of stakeholders or take a room of users and use those people's time effectively, facilitating a workshop that will actually draw requirements that nobody in the room knows to say if asked, what are your requirements? But instead can actually bring out those ideas, sometimes by having people draw things and then say why it won't work. That these soft skills are just as important as the hard skills. And that in order to put together an experienced design team, you need all of these skills, not just some, if you're going to produce great industry-changing design. And the interesting thing is, in the 10 years that we've been studying this, the size of design teams has actually been getting smaller. There are some teams that are getting larger, but the vast majority are getting smaller and smaller. And it's not unusual to find 3 people, 2 people, 1 person design teams. The team of 1 way outnumbers the team of 20 in organizations now. So how do you do all this with a team of 1? Just up the road here is the Leahy Clinic. And there's a doctor at the Leahy Clinic, Stephen Margles. He's an amazing doctor. Stephen Margles is famous, world famous, for his diagnosis and treatment of problems surrounding hands and wrists. He's an orthopedic surgeon who specializes in hands and wrists. Concert pianists who've had their hands crushed in an accident have had their hands rebuilt by Dr. Margles such that they can continue to play on the concert, on the symphony circuit. He's amazing. Companies that make prosthetics and other orthopedic tools come to him for advice. If you have a hand or wrist problem, you can get an appointment with him, but it's a 6-month wait. Because basically the dude is up to his elbows in hands and wrists. Just saying. He doesn't do anything else. He just does hands and wrists. And he is in a department filled with people who just do hands and wrists. There are 34 orthopedic surgeons at the Leahy Clinic. Almost all of them have some specialization, whether it's hands and wrists, or feet, or shoulders, or hips. It's a department filled with people who specialize in very narrow, focused perspectives. They are the world's experts in these things. And people travel from all over the world to see these doctors. Now, if you get on Route 2 and you head 10 miles to the west, you're going to come to Emerson Hospital. And Emerson Hospital has an orthopedic department. And in their orthopedic department, they have 8 doctors, none of whom specialize in hands and wrists. If you have a hands and wrist problem, any of them will be able to treat you. Of course, they can't treat you with the same knowledge and experience that Dr. Margles can, but chances are you don't need Dr. Margles. Chances are they will treat you just fine. Their expertise, their experience is fine. But one day they're working on your hands, and the next day they're working on somebody else's shoulders. So they do not specialize. Now, if we travel 175 miles northeast into the burbs of Maine, we come to Rumford Hospital. And Rumford Hospital has an orthopedic specialist who comes there 2 days a week. So if you want to see him, you got to show up on one of those 2 days. And there are other hospitals in Maine that don't have any orthopedic surgeons. So if you need some help orthopedically, you either have to drive to the big cities where they have them, or the guy who delivered a baby yesterday is going to clear an impacted bowel tomorrow is going to work on your wrist. And maybe that's good enough. Because maybe it's that type of problem. The thing here is that Dr. Margles couldn't do what he wants to do, couldn't do what he's been doing at Rumford Hospital. Not because Rumford Hospital has a thing against specialists. It's because Rumford Hospital can't afford a specialist. There's just not enough business to keep Dr. Margles busy. And that's the nature of specializing. The nature of specializing is that it's an economic problem. The economics has to justify having a specialist. Now, it's interesting, because Dr. Margles, if you look at his history is one of just being a doctor. The dude went to medical school and learned to be a doctor, not a specialist. The specialist thing, that didn't come till later in his career. He did the normal residency that most doctors do, where he did a couple weeks, 6 weeks or so in neuro, he did 6 weeks or so in OBGYN, he did 6 weeks or so in trauma, he did 6 weeks or so in surgery, and he found his passion eventually in orthopedics and then became the expert he is in hands and wrists. But he's trained to be a doctor. He's trained to do everything a doctor does. If you are on an island and you have to make sure that the baby gets delivered and he's the only doctor on the island, he's the dude you want to have deliver the baby. He hasn't delivered a baby since he was a resident, but he knows how to deliver a baby better than you do. And that's the criteria. So he started as a generalist and became a specialist. And that's what it is, right? We have this idea of the specialist. And the specialist is that you have more expertise in one area than in all the others. He has more expertise in hands and wrists than he does in delivering babies. There are people who specialize in delivering babies. There are people who specialize in delivering babies that are going to be 8 weeks premature. That's a completely different specialty. There are people who specialize in delivering babies that are from parents who have extreme high-risk health conditions where the mother could die in pregnancy or in birth, right? That's a specialty. And you want people with those specialties, but you don't always get a choice to have people with those specialties. So sometimes you have to have a generalist. And a generalist is someone who has equal expertise in most areas. Now, that expertise can go really deep because being a doctor in Botswana means you get to learn about everything. And if you want to save lives, you save lives by learning as much as you can about everything. So they have deep expertise, which is admired strongly by people like Dr. Margles. So just because you're a generalist doesn't mean you're less knowledgeable. It just means that you have different knowledge, and it's broad. But there's actually a third category here. And the third category is called compartmentalist. And a compartmentalist has expertise in only one area. And the problem is that the UX field, for the last 20 years, has not been making specialists. It's been making compartmentalists. People who learn information architecture only learn information architecture. People who learn interaction design only learn interaction design. People who learn how to conduct usability tests only learn how to conduct usability tests. And so the problem that our field is facing is that we have a lot of compartmentalists. We do not have a lot of generalists. There's another name for compartmentalist. It's called a career-limiting move. The problem is that in the not-so-distant future, a generalist is going to be worth way more money to an organization that's trying to add design into their mix than a compartmentalist. And most of those organizations cannot afford specialists. GE's engine division in Lynn, the engines they are building now have more sensors in them than all of the sensors we had 10 years ago in the planet. Each engine produces 1 million data points a second about what that engine is doing. GE's biggest problem right now is how do they render that data in a way that tells the mechanics and the maintenance engineers and the fuel supply chain people and all the things that those sensors produce, the things they need to know. This idea of big data, the big problem in big data is how do you make sense of it? And that's a design problem. The engine division of Lynn, which has always had hardware people, is now hiring designers to solve that problem. They're not going to have a lot of designers. They're going to have 1, 2, maybe 3 when they're done. And those people have to design every aspect of this problem, and it's a big problem. So they're going to want generalists. They're going to want an army of generalists. And this is how it works. This is a great picture. I love this picture. It's from the Mayo Health.org site. It's a picture of someone experiencing a brain aneurysm. Now, if you've ever had a friend or family member have a brain aneurysm, then you've probably gone through the weird experience of seeing how doctors react to someone who's diagnosed with a brain aneurysm. If you spend any amount of time in a trauma room, the people there don't get fazed by hardly anything. They've seen it all. You know, those folks deal with gunshot wounds and all sorts of crazy every night. So somebody comes in with something, they don't think too much about it. They're very deliberate, they're very slow-paced, they move. If you don't have something incredibly serious, you can sit there for hours and hours. A patient who's exhibiting sudden vomiting, possibly spontaneous blindness, maybe they fainted. Those are things for concern. So the first thing they do is they send them off for some sort of CAT scan or MRI. If that CAT scan or MRI shows that that person has a brain aneurysm, that slow, deliberate pace changes to get this person into surgery now. Everything gets sped up about 1,000 times. Why? Because the survival rate of a patient who is diagnosed in a trauma room with a brain aneurysm goes down by about 95% after 30 minutes if it's not taken care of. So they don't want to deal with something that takes an hour. They want it done now. So all of a sudden, an emergency room is prepped, whatever was scheduled was put aside, an operating theater is created, and surgery happens. This diagram sort of shows you what's going on. Suddenly, this blood vessel, which has this wacky little thing extending from it, it pops. Blood flows into the brain. A stroke can happen, or worse. You can see it clearly from the diagram in a way that you couldn't see it by reading a couple paragraphs about what a brain aneurysm is. So it's brilliant. It's a brilliant piece of work. But what's even more brilliant is how this thing was created. Because this was created by someone who has really good visual design skills. Right? This is a really good person with their visual design stuff. But it doesn't stop with their visual design skills. Because this is a really good image of the human form. Anyone who's been to art school knows that they don't let you start with drawing people. You have to start with fruit. Right? You only get to draw people like in the second or third year. This is an advanced topic in school. So whoever did this, they obviously had made it through that. But it didn't stop there, because it seems to understand anatomy. After all, look, we get a beautiful picture of the spinal column. We can see the jaw. We can see the cranial cavity. The anatomy of this person is very clear. Anatomy is not taught in most art schools. If it is, it's an elective. Most of the time, it's a graduate level course. So someone here knows a lot about how to draw not just the human form, but to draw anatomy. That's pretty impressive. But it goes further, because to understand how an aneurysm renders itself in the brain means you know something about medical science. These are 4 distinct skill sets in one person. And they have a cool job. Right? This was not done by the visual designer handing it off to the human form person who handed it off to the anatomy person who then handed it off to the medical guy. That did not happen here. It could not happen here. One person did all of this. And the team of people that Mayo has can do all of this. In the field of medicine, there's been a radical change in the last 30 years. The high incident rate of accidents caused a large problem with people showing up in trauma rooms. But even more problematic is that the trauma room recovery rate has been astronomically better. So people have been surviving sports accidents, car accidents at a much higher rate than they've ever survived them before. And this has caused a downstream problem of people who have long-term chronic pain and recovery issues that we've never had to deal with before, because most people just didn't survive. The problem with this is that you have 3 different disciplines that deals with this problem. You have neurology that's dealing with the way the nerves are reacting in the body. You have rehabilitation, which has to deal with how people recover from surgery and accidents. And then you have pain management, which sort of looks at the process of how do you either temper the pain or remove the source of the pain. And these were traditionally done by 3 separate specialties inside the medical field, often who did not talk to each other and were working at odds with each other. So the medical field decided to do something different. They created a whole new position. The position is called physiatry. You've probably never heard of it. If you have, I'm sorry, because it means you have some long-term chronic pain issue, or you know somebody who does. But physiatrists are combined neurologists, rehab specialists, and pain treatment specialists, all in one package. They are sort of uber generalists. They know all of these different specialties to be able to deal with the package so that they can solve the problem all at once. And if you think about it, we're seeing some of this now. We hear terms in the UX field like content strategy or service design. And all these are packages of separate skill sets into a single person to handle a single type of problem to create, in essence, a generalist. But there's another name for generalist that's now flying around, and that's a unicorn. Because the belief out there is that these people can't exist. The people who've been trained to be compartmentalists, who have pride in their compartmentalism, believe that you can only do one thing really well, and so they are telling the world that you will never find a unicorn, that we cannot make unicorns. It turns out you can make unicorns. My good friend Adam Connor represented this with this picture. It's basically a horse and a narwhal. Just saying. But the thing is that we can do this. It's actually not that hard. You just have to start training people in all the skills early, just like you do in medicine, just like you do in other professions. And you have to give them the ability to practice in these fields. And so we can do this. Now, when we look at the design problem, we see that there's a pattern that happens. Startup comes out with a product. Maybe it's got 3 really cool features that no one's ever thought of before, because it only has 2 or 3 things. The design team can make an investment that really works well. And that means that they actually bring out that intent in a way that makes it stand out from everybody else. It creates that really good value. And it's a success. So the startup comes out and it has this fabulous success. So now they have to do it again. Well, that means they have to add more features. And then they have to add more features. Because after all, you have to keep people interested. You have to keep adding more. And so now we get to like version 6, and we've added a ton of features. The problem now is that our code base has gotten massive. And it's really hard to add anything without breaking something else. And the individual features that we have, well, most people don't use most of them. In fact, when we go out and watch folks, we notice that they only use a small number of the features that we have. So now what the really smart companies do is that they say, okay, no one's using those lesser features, or few people are. Let's cut them. Let's say no. And they start to take them out. And they put out a new release that just has the handful of features left. And this is that features phase of development. And it turns into the experience phase of the product, where suddenly we're no longer selling the features, but we're selling the experience. The funny thing is, a lot of companies say, we can't do that. We can't pull those things out. Our customers demand it. And so what happens? A competitor does it instead. And we see that pattern over and over and over again. And what we're seeing here is a change where we have an increase in features, an increase in complexity, and a decrease in experience. And that's got a name. We call it experience rot. And experience rot happens to every product or service over time. One doesn't have to look much farther than the latest version of iTunes to see that Apple is a victim of experience rot. Every new release makes it slightly more difficult, slightly harder, and they're having more trouble pulling this off. So this is hard. Some folks get this, but a lot of folks don't. So what do? Well, the excellent organizations focus on what we call the journey map. The journey map is basically this idea that you can map out what a customer or a user's experience is like. You map it out over time on a scale of frustration to delight. So our experience might start out somewhat delightful, but then we get mired in something that's a little frustrating. And then over time, we see more delight, we see more frustration. And that's the experience that our current users or customers have with the thing we're designing. And so this we can call the current experience. But what would happen if we imagined a version of our product that ironed out all of those negative things? It sort of drew a line across the top that was sort of even and delightful all the way across. Well, that we can call our aspirational experience. We can imagine what the design might look like, what we will have taken out, what we will have made simpler, where we would have filled in the gaps in order to get that aspirational experience. And the space between the current experience and the aspirational experience, well, that has a name. And that name is innovation. Innovation is what happens when we slowly raise the current experience to match the aspirational experience. And it just takes spending time watching things. The Apple Store, by itself, there's nothing hard about this. This is a simple scheduling process. Like Sandy said, delis have been doing it for 50 years. So this is just solving the problem with tools we already have. Sometimes the technology suddenly just becomes more affordable. This is the Square. It's a little plug-in. It's a little device with an audio jack. You plug it in. It happens to be square. You plug it into the top of your iPhone. It's got a slit in it. Now, with a simple app and a very small fee, anybody can take a credit card. Your babysitter can charge your babysitting on your credit card by swiping it through this device, which they give away for free. It's completely changing the credit card industry. So now everybody's worried about Square. PayPal's worried. They came out with the triangle. This is because the hardware got cheaper. Same with what Walgreens has been doing. The brain dead app from a technology standpoint. Point the camera at a refill at a prescription bottle, read the barcode, and submit a refill. Absolutely brilliant experience. So much so that it's now 40% of all online refills come from this app. And that brilliant experience, technically, it's not that innovative. Really, right? Scanning a barcode, we've been able to do that since the 70s, or if you're George Bush, the 80s. Not that difficult. GE. One of the designers at GE was a guy named David Dietz, who was very proud of this device, extremely proud of it, and was watching its use in a hospital, like he does quite frequently, when a small child came in, completely in tears and completely afraid of this menacing large thing that she was about to be thrown into and swallowed up by, scared out of her wits. And he thought, gee, we could do something better than this. So the team went back and they worked with kids and they came up with something completely different. A pirate ship. The kids are told that they're going on an adventure. Would they like to see the pirate ship? Everybody wants to come into the room and see the pirate ship. And then they're told, would you like to go on a ride in the pirate ship? And everybody wants to lay down. And then they are told that if they stay absolutely still, they will see the glowing dolphins jump over the ship. And the lights of the sensor start to move over the ship as the child is being treated through the MRI or diagnosed through the MRI. And suddenly, the child stays absolutely still because they don't want the lights to go away. Sedation rates have gone down 80% for children who use this MRI versus the previous MRI. 80%. You no longer have to sedate the kids because they stay absolutely still because it's an adventure. It's the same hardware, but a completely different design. It's innovative. So, extraordinary design comes from extraordinary designers. And those designers understand that business is changing. So what we have here is a great time to be a designer. And that's what I came to talk to you about. Now we're going to have a little bit of time for questions and we'll have dessert. But I did promise I wanted to tell you about it. So we are looking for an intern. We're looking for someone really special, front-end web designer. We actually have a running internship. So this is something that happens every 4 months. It's a paid internship. It's at our offices. You learn all sorts of really cool stuff. If you know someone who wants to become a web designer, who has sort of got the basic skills and is ready to try it out but doesn't quite have enough experience for a job, this is the perfect 4-month paid experience to get some time on the resume. Please come see me, or you can send me an email at jspool@uie.com. You can also follow me on the Twitters at jmspool. I tweet often, sometimes after my curfew, for which I get into trouble. As Merlin Mann once said, Twitter is really just 140 characters of id. And that's how I think of it. But here's the other thing I wanted to tell you. So we have this conference called the UX Immersion Conference. It's our second year that we're doing this. It's in Seattle, April 22nd to 24th. This year it's all on mobile. But last year it was on a combination of Agile and mobile. And we actually video recorded many of the presentations at this. And normally we sell these, but I want to give them to you. And the way we're going to do this is that many of you signed up for this and you put your email address into Eventbrite. That's all you needed to do. But if you didn't do that, if you somehow escaped that process, then where's Peter Major? Peter, you have to give Peter your email address before the evening is out. And over the next few days, we will send you the access to this so that you can get access to it just like all the people who have paid for it. Just don't tell them that you got it for free. And so that's it. So this is my Oprah moment. So you get videos, and you get videos, and you get videos, and you get videos. And that's what I came to talk about. Thank you very much for encouraging my behavior. Do we have time for questions? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we have time for a couple of questions. Raise your hand, and a man with a microphone will give it to you. You can have the mic, take it home, use it for your... No, I'm sorry, that's not right. No, I'm sorry.
So earlier on, you laid out this great formula, and you said some companies get it, and some companies don't.
Yes.
And integrating a good experience, it's more than just hiring the resources. It's more than just changing your process, even if you're using lean UX practices. And I think you did a presentation years ago that it goes to a cultural change. So my question for you is, for people who are looking for these many job openings, many of which might be with companies where they would be that army of one, how do you determine beforehand which company might be one that's getting it and you're about to revolutionize their business, and which company is going to be so resistant to change that they think that they want it, but they're not quite ready to actually make that leap?
Well, that's an awesome question. I would look for three things. The first thing I'd look for, and it's a simple question that you can ask anybody on the team, which is, in the last 6 weeks, how many hours have you spent watching real users use your design? And if everybody on the team, anybody you ask, doesn't say at least 2 hours in the last 6 weeks, they're probably not going to be there. The best companies are spending that kind of time, in fact, more time, more frequently, but they spend at least 2 hours every 6 weeks watching people. So that's the first question. The second question I would ask, it's a simple question, is what do you think it will be like to use your design 5 years from now? Now, you're not looking for what the actual design will be 5 years from now. You're not looking for what their business model might be 5 years from now. What you're asking them is to actually explain that aspirational experience, because that's probably a 5-year window to get the whole thing above the frustration scale into delight. So it'll take about 5 years. And anybody on the team should be able to rattle that off like they could probably tell you the story of Hansel and Gretel if you asked them. Because everybody on the team's been talking about it. And so anybody on the team should be able to tell you, and everybody on the team should tell you exactly the same story, just like Hansel and Gretel. The third question has to do with mitigated risk. And the question is this. In the last 6 weeks, have you guys had a party to celebrate a failure? See, the deal is that if you're not regularly celebrating your failures, it means you're not taking the time to enjoy the fact that some sort of failure actually caused you to learn stuff that you wouldn't have otherwise learned. And we fail all the time. We always make mistakes, particularly when we're trying stuff out. So companies that are not learning from their failures are either punishing the people who fail or they're not trying, which means they're risk averse. And risk averse companies produce crap. So what you need are, so those are the three questions. Have you spent time watching your users in the last 6 weeks, or at least 2 hours? Can you tell me what the design, what the experience of using the design will be like in 5 years? And in the last 6 weeks, have you celebrated a failure? And the best companies can answer those questions the way you want them to be answered. Demetrius, or actually, yeah, we'll figure out how to get you a mic from the Magic Mic people. You guys can just see people raise their hand and give them a mic. That works for me. So.
Great talk, thank you. Better talk than last time I heard, and that was a good talk.
Well, I'm trying to get better. I'll keep doing it till I get it right.
Okay, but there was just one thing that bothered me a little.
Only one
Just
thing?
just one thing.
Then it must have been a better talk.
No. In the beginning, you spent a lot of time talking about the experience design of Apple stores. And I kept waiting for the punchline, which never came. Because the punchline, I thought, should be, the other stores can't duplicate it, no one sells as much, on and on and on, because it depends on the product you're selling. And you never brought that into the equation. I mean, I don't care
I don't
how,
think it does. I think
so-
it depends on the experience of the product you're selling. Because Gateway
The
has
experience-
stores where they're trying to sell. Microsoft's problem is not that Microsoft's products are inferior. They are, but that's not their problem. Right? The store is a unique experience because it's a unique experience. JCPenney could create a unique experience. It's not going to get it by copying Apple. right? If all you're doing is looking at your competitors, if all you're doing is chasing your competitors, you spend a lot of time staring at their ass. And so you need to find out what your innovation is. So you wouldn't do it the way Apple does it.
Right,
You would
when
do
you-
it by looking at your current experience and figuring out what your aspirational experience should be. Now, you could look to Apple to get inspiration for that aspirational experience in places where they've innovated. But everybody's got to do it their own way. And that's the problem.
Well, that makes sense, but when you walk out of JCPenney's or Target or any store, I mean, the product you buy can't fall apart or not work. I mean, so that's, you need the
Okay, so here's a question. How many people here have bought an Apple product? Raise your hand, keep it up. Okay, how many people have had to schedule a Genius Bar appointment because that product has had some problem? Keep it up. Okay, so Apple products do not work any better than anybody else's products, right? They have the same failure rate as everybody else's products. The difference is that they have taken a dude and they put him in the back of the store, and then through an absolute brilliant move, they don't call him a specialist, they don't call him a geek, they call him a genius. Right? His business card says genius. He goes home on Thanksgiving and his uncle says, "So what do you do?" He says, "I'm a genius." Okay? Martha, you raised a genius. Okay? That is what makes the Apple Store special. Now, JCPenney doesn't need geniuses because their defects do not require. If you have to have a genius to staff at JCPenney, you are selling the wrong product. Okay? You need something else that's going to be unique to JCPenney, and that's what's important here. That is the absolute key. So it's not about the Apple product as much as we'd like to believe it is, as much as those of us who've bought and drank the Apple Kool-Aid, and man, Kool-Aid gets the raw end of the stick on that deal, don't they?
Okay, but so Jared,
because
so when
I've never bought the Kool-Aid.
So when the iPhone came out, it wasn't any better than the other smartphones.
Well, a lot of people were holding it wrong. That was one of the problems, right? There were all sorts of issues with each release of the iPhone that caused all sorts of problems. So one of the things that I cut from the talk, but because of time, and I still went over, was I have this picture of the original bills that AT&T sent out for the iPhone. When you first got the Apple data plan, AT&T was not prepared for the Apple data plan. And they would send you a bill like they'd sent every other customer who had an Apple plan that detailed every piece of data you'd ever gotten through the phone. And so you would get these 300-page bills that all had, because it was a single price plan, they all had $0.00 for the line item. So you got 300 pages of $0.00 line items. It was a complete disaster. It was a lot of dead trees. People complained about it. It was a miserable experience. Apple gets things wrong on a regular basis. But they get a lot of things right because they have a process that focuses on intent and design. And that's the key. When you see someone raise their hand, just give it to us. So there's one person over there. There's one person, I thought I saw a hand over here. Yes? No? No? Okay, so just over here.
Hey, Jared. Something I'm surprised you didn't mention was the Apple checkout process. When you walk into the store, there are people wandering around who are all wearing these Genius labels, and they see you holding a product or
Right.
looking for a product and say, hey, I can check you out right here.
Oh, it's
That's-
gotten even better than that because
that's
now
even-
you can download an app on the phone.
Yeah, exactly.
And you don't even have to talk to the genius.
No,
So
you can just scan
if
the
you
product
are
and
the
go.
type of Apple customer who actually doesn't like to talk to other people, of which there's a lot of people who fall into that category in those stores, you don't have to do that. You can just scan the product and then walk out of the store with the product by itself, which is just a revolutionary idea. Imagine a 7-Eleven letting you scan the product and walk out of the door. It's probably not going to happen.
Stop and Shop did it first.
Sort of. Have you used the Stop and Shop process? Yeah. The Stop and Shop process is sort of the IRS version of that. You have to actually tell the machine 4 times that you want to pay with a credit card. It's just incredible. It says, please select your thing. Now please select which type of payment. Now please select which type of payment. And one last time, just to make sure, please select your type of payment. And it asks you 4 times through this obnoxious, and there are 4 different keypads. And it's because it's made by 4 different vendors. And each store has a different configuration. The Stop and Shop process is a brilliant example of what happens when you let 4 different committees design parts of the process. I think we have. It's time for dessert. One more. Do we have a question? Okay. One more, and then the vitamin T people will kill me if we don't have dessert. So we're going to. By the way, the vitamin T people, love them. Great place to go if you are looking to become an excellent to get an excellent job. They know how to do this. So who has the mic?
Right here, Jared.
Okay.
Good speech. Anyways, I wanted to say you didn't really mention the experience of e-commerce in your speech at all, and how.
You know, I didn't mention the experience of a lot of things. I should end the talk with the list of all the things I didn't talk about. It's a very long list. But yes. So what about e-commerce should I have talked about?
Most of the best experiences in this businesses that do the best obviously have the best experiences, like say like your Amazon or your Newegg, and how are other businesses even coming close to what these places can offer?
Well, again, I have a whole talk on the Amazon thing, so which I gave here a couple years ago. So I'm not going to go into that. But again, what the trick is, they found their individual way of creating a great experience. The interesting thing about the Amazon experience versus the Newegg experience versus Apple.com store experience versus a small vendor like Lens Rentals, which has an amazing checkout process, but you've probably never heard of them, is that they're all unique to their business. They're all unique, lensrentals.com. They're all unique to what they're trying to do. And you couldn't, even if you're in the same industry, you couldn't copy them because your business is different than the other businesses in your industry. If they were always all the same, you wouldn't have a differentiator for people to come to you. So they're all unique in the way they do business, and they all have found an experience that is unique, and that's the key thing. So it comes down to the fact that what has to happen is you have to look at your own experience. You have to spend time with your users. You have to look for the gaps in that experience, and you have to build upon that. That's what the best businesses have done. Everybody uses basically the same formula. They don't copy their competitors. They don't spend a lot of time looking at their competitors. They spend a lot of time looking at the experience that they currently have and the experience that they aspire to, and they take baby step innovations to get to that. Thank you very much for encouraging my behavior.